"Please, help me," she begged, bleeding. A lonely rancher froze when he saw her naked. The sun was just beginning to rise over the wide, empty plains, casting a golden light across the rolling fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. The ranch, a modest but sturdy property, sat alone in the middle of this vast landscape. John, the rancher, had lived here for most of his life. He knew every fence, every patch of grass, and every hidden trail that ran through the property. Life on the ranch was quiet, sometimes painfully so, but John had grown used to it. He liked the solitude. It gave him time to think, to work, and to enjoy the simple rhythm of life, feeding the animals, tending the crops, and repairing fences. That morning, like every morning, John rose early. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of dew and earth. He poured himself a cup of coffee, dark and strong, and stepped out onto the porch to watch the sky change colors. The silence was comforting, broken only by the soft lowing of the cows and the occasional chirping of birds. He listened carefully, as always, noting every sound. Out here, in this lonely expanse, you learn to notice the smallest details, because they could be signs of danger or distress. John had just finished feeding the horses when he noticed something unusual in the distance. A small figure appeared along the edge of the field, moving slowly, almost stumbling. At first, he thought it might be one of the ranch hands or perhaps a traveler passing by. But as the figure drew closer, John realized something was wrong. The way the person moved was hesitant, almost desperate, and there was a certain urgency in the steps. It was not a normal pace of someone simply walking across the plains. Curiosity mixed with caution, and John set down the bucket of feed and started walking toward the figure. The grass was tall in places, brushing against his boots, and the morning light caught the dust rising with each step. As he got closer, he noticed the person was a woman. Her clothes were torn and she appeared weak, as if she had been struggling for a long time. Panic and fear were written all over her face, and her eyes widened when she saw him. She stumbled again, and John instinctively rushed forward to steady her. "Please, help me," she whispered, her voice trembling, and he could see blood staining her clothes. She looked exhausted, and every movement seemed to take immense effort. John felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had never seen someone in such a state before, and despite the fear and uncertainty, he knew he had to act quickly. The ranch was isolated, and if she needed medical attention, it would be some time before help could arrive. He guided her to the porch, supporting her weight carefully. Every step was slow and deliberate, as he tried to avoid jostling her too much. The morning air was cold against their skin, but John barely noticed, focused entirely on keeping her stable. She slumped into a chair, shivering and weak, and he ran inside to fetch a first aid kit. His hands moved quickly, practiced from years of tending to animals and occasional accidents around the ranch, but now the task felt infinitely more serious. As he cleaned the blood and bandaged the wound, John spoke softly, trying to calm her. "You're safe here. I'll take care of you. Just stay still," he said, though he could hear the tension in his own voice. Her breathing was shallow, and she flinched with every movement, clearly in pain. John made mental notes of what he would need: water, blankets, and perhaps a doctor. But first, he focused on keeping her calm and stable. Once the immediate bleeding was under control, he brought her a cup of water. She drank slowly, her hands trembling, and John watched carefully, making sure she didn't choke or collapse. The sun had risen fully now, bathing the ranch in a warm light, but John barely noticed. His attention was entirely on the woman, on making sure she survived these first critical moments. There was a quiet intensity in the air, a mix of relief that she was alive and fear of what might happen next. John also took a moment to observe her more carefully. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with hair matted from dirt and sweat. Her eyes, though wide with fear, held a flicker of determination, as if she had been through something unimaginable and was still fighting to hold on. It struck John how fragile yet resilient she seemed at the same time. He realized that she had been alone for a while, struggling through something he could only imagine. Time seemed to stretch as he worked. The silence of the plains, once comforting, now felt heavy with tension. The birds had quieted, and even the wind seemed to pause, as if the world itself was holding its breath. John's mind raced with questions. Who was she? How had she ended up here, injured and alone? And most importantly, what danger had she escaped or was still in? There were no immediate answers, only the urgent need to stabilize her and ensure her safety. After some time, the woman's breathing became steadier. She leaned back in the chair, exhausted but alive, and John allowed himself a brief moment of relief. He sat nearby, keeping watch, offering quiet reassurance and waiting for her to gather enough strength to speak more. The ranch, usually so quiet and predictable, had become a place of tension and hope, a small island of safety in the midst of uncertainty. Though he had lived a life of solitude, John felt a strange connection to this stranger. He knew he couldn't turn away, couldn't ignore someone in need, no matter the risk. The plains stretched endlessly around them, indifferent to human struggles, but here, in this small cabin on the edge of the world, a moment of humanity had taken hold. The rest of the day would bring challenges, questions, and perhaps answers, but for now, John focused on the simple task of keeping her alive. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, John reflected on the unexpected turn his morning had taken. What had begun as another ordinary day on the ranch had transformed into a test of courage and compassion. The woman's story remained a mystery, but her presence had already changed something in him. He felt the weight of responsibility, the call to act decisively, and the quiet hope that he could help her recover. The first part of this story was not just about survival. It was about connection, empathy, and the sudden, unforeseen ways life could demand bravery from even the most solitary of hearts. The ranch, once a place of routine, had become a stage for a new story, one that John had no choice but to face head-on. He knew the coming hours would reveal more about the woman, about the events that had brought her here, and about his own capacity for courage. The quiet plains waited silently, as if holding its breath for what would happen next, while inside the small cabin, a fragile life clung to hope. This moment, though brief, would mark the beginning of a journey neither of them could have anticipated, a journey that would test endurance, patience, and trust. And as John sat beside her, watching her struggle to regain her strength, he understood that sometimes the most ordinary life could be interrupted by the most extraordinary circumstances, leaving a mark that would never be forgotten. The first part of this story closed with the morning sun fully illuminating the ranch, a symbol of both the harshness and beauty of the world around them. Inside, a wounded but determined woman rested, while a lonely rancher, once accustomed to isolation, began to confront the reality that life could change in a single, unexpected moment. The afternoon sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows across the ranch as John continued to help the woman recover. Her breathing had steadied, but her face remained pale, and her body trembled slightly with weakness. Every now and then, she closed her eyes as if trying to hold back the exhaustion that threatened to take over completely. John could feel the tension in the room, a mix of worry and relief. He knew the first steps were always the hardest, but he also understood that the hours ahead could be just as difficult, if not more so. After making her comfortable with extra blankets and a small pillow, John stepped outside for a moment, taking a deep breath of the fresh, open air. He walked toward the barn, trying to let his mind organize the jumble of thoughts swirling inside. Who was this woman? How had she ended up injured in the middle of nowhere? And what kind of trouble had she faced? Each question brought with it a knot of concern. Out here, people often got lost, injured, or trapped by nature itself, and John had seen his share of accidents. Yet something about this situation felt different. It was more urgent, more fragile, and more personal. Returning to the cabin, John brought with him some water and a light snack. "You need to keep your strength up," he said gently, placing the food on the table. The woman managed a small nod, too tired to speak, but her eyes met his, filled with gratitude and uncertainty. She ate slowly, each bite deliberate, as if the effort alone was exhausting. John watched carefully, making sure she swallowed and did not choke. He realized that every small action mattered now. In moments like these, patience was not just a virtue, it was a necessity. As the day went on, John decided it was time to try and learn more about her condition. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked, keeping his voice soft and calm. She hesitated, as if weighing whether to trust him with even the simplest information. Finally, she whispered, "Emma." The name was quiet, but it carried with it a sense of resilience, as though she had held onto it as the last piece of herself in a difficult world. John nodded, offering a small smile to reassure her. "Emma, do you remember what happened?" he asked carefully. She shook her head slowly, her eyes brimming with tears. "It's all a blur," she said, her voice trembling. John nodded again, understanding that trauma often clouded memory, making the simplest details hard to recall. He did not push her for answers. Instead, he focused on providing what she needed most: safety, warmth, and care. As the sun moved lower, the ranch seemed even quieter, the vast fields stretching endlessly in every direction. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the soft sound of rustling leaves. John and Emma sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. He thought about the responsibilities that came with being alone on a ranch, how isolated life could be, and how quickly it could change. She thought about the events that had brought her here, the fear she had felt, and the strange relief of finding someone who would help without question. John realized that he needed to secure the ranch for the night and make sure Emma would be safe if she needed to rest. He moved around quickly but carefully, checking the locks on the doors, closing the gates to the fields, and ensuring the animals were fed. Even small tasks felt significant now, as if every action was part of a larger effort to create stability in a world that had suddenly felt chaotic for both of them. As evening approached, John prepared a small dinner. It was simple but nourishing: bread, soup, and some fresh vegetables from the garden. He offered it to Emma, who ate a little more eagerly now that she felt safer. She smiled faintly, a small gesture, but it filled John with a quiet warmth. He realized that trust was beginning to form, slowly but steadily, in the unlikeliest of circumstances. A bond was developing between them, born not from shared history, but from the immediate need to care and survive. After dinner, John suggested that Emma rest, and he helped her to a small guest room in the cabin. He made sure she had everything she needed: water, a blanket, and a pillow, and left the door slightly ajar so she would not feel completely alone. Sitting outside on the porch, John watched the sky turn shades of pink and orange, then deep blue as stars began to appear. The quiet of the plains felt almost sacred, a gentle reminder that life continued even in moments of fear and uncertainty. Despite the calm of the evening, John knew that questions and challenges lay ahead. Emma's injuries, though stabilized, required care, and there was still the matter of understanding her story. He could not ignore the possibility that she had faced danger or needed protection beyond what he could provide. Yet he felt a growing determination to help her, no matter how long it took or how complicated the situation became. Night fell fully, and the ranch became enveloped in darkness, broken only by the soft glow of lights from the cabin. John sat quietly, reflecting on the day's events. He thought about how quickly life could change, how one ordinary morning had turned into a test of courage, compassion, and endurance. He also realized that he had learned something about himself, that even in solitude he could act decisively, offer comfort, and make a difference in someone's life. Inside, Emma rested, her breathing deepening as sleep finally took over. The quiet moments allowed her body to recover and her mind to process the shock of recent events. John stayed nearby, vigilant but unobtrusive, respecting her need for rest. He knew that tomorrow would bring new questions, challenges, and perhaps revelations about who she was and how she had ended up on the ranch. As he watched the stars twinkle above the plains, John thought about the journey ahead. It would not be easy, but he felt ready. In this vast and quiet world, two lives had intersected unexpectedly, creating a bond that neither of them could have anticipated. The night was long, but it was also filled with promise, a promise that in the face of fear and uncertainty, compassion and courage could light the way. The first night passed with quiet vigilance. The sounds of the ranch, the soft rustle of the wind, the distant calls of animals, formed a gentle backdrop to a story that was just beginning. By morning, both John and Emma would awaken to new challenges, questions, and decisions that would shape the rest of their journey. For now, though, they rested, finding a fragile sense of peace in a world that had, just hours ago, felt overwhelmingly uncertain. Through this first day and night together, the foundation of trust and care was laid. John had acted with calm determination, Emma had found a glimmer of safety, and the quiet plains held witness to the beginnings of a story of resilience, courage, and unexpected connection. Tomorrow promised new trials, but for the first time since she arrived, Emma felt a little less alone, and John felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The day closed on a note of quiet hope. The ranch, a place usually defined by routine and isolation, had become a refuge, a small island of safety in a vast and unpredictable world. And as the stars shone down on the plains, both lives rested under their gentle light, unaware of the challenges that the coming days would bring, but strengthened by the simple yet profound act of being there for one another. The morning broke slowly over the ranch, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. Birds began their familiar songs, and the gentle rustling of leaves filled the air. John woke early, as was his habit, but today he moved with a new sense of purpose. Emma was still asleep, her breathing steady and even, but he knew she would need support as soon as she awoke. The events of the previous day had changed the rhythm of life on the ranch, replacing ordinary routines with vigilance, care, and an awareness of something unknown yet urgent. John began his morning by tending to the animals, moving quickly but carefully. He fed the horses, refilled the water troughs, and checked the fences. Each task, familiar and comforting, gave him time to think. He wondered how long Emma had been alone, what dangers she had faced, and what her journey to the ranch had been like. The questions were endless, and yet there were no immediate answers. All he could do was prepare for the day and ensure that she was safe and cared for. When Emma finally woke, she seemed weaker than the day before. Her eyes, though filled with curiosity, also held a quiet fear. John approached her with a calm smile. "Good morning, how are you feeling?" he asked gently. She tried to sit up, wincing slightly as a sharp twinge of pain ran through her arm and leg. John quickly moved to support her. "Take it slow. You don't need to rush anything," he said. Emma nodded, taking deep breaths as she adjusted to the morning light and the new day. Breakfast was quiet but nourishing. John prepared eggs, toast, and a small portion of fruit. Emma ate slowly, occasionally pausing to sip water. The simplicity of the meal contrasted sharply with the chaos and fear she had experienced before arriving at the ranch. John noticed the way her hands shook slightly as she held her cup, evidence of both weakness and lingering tension. He said nothing, choosing instead to let her regain strength in her own time. Once breakfast was over, John suggested they spend some time outside. "The air will help you feel better," he said. Emma agreed, grateful for the suggestion. With John's support, she walked slowly across the yard, leaning lightly on his arm. The sunlight warmed her face, and for the first time since she had arrived, there was a flicker of calm in her eyes. She noticed the wide fields, the grazing animals, and the quiet beauty of the plains. For a brief moment, the fear and pain seemed to fade, replaced by the simple wonder of the world around her. As they walked, John spoke gently. "You're safe here. Nothing will hurt you while you're with me," he said. Emma nodded, her lips pressed together as if holding back emotions too complex to express. The trust between them, though fragile, was beginning to grow. She had been alone for so long, and the kindness and patience John offered were both unfamiliar and comforting. Each step, each word, built a connection that neither of them had expected but both needed. After some time, John led her to the barn, showing her where the animals were fed and explaining some of the daily routines. It was not just a lesson in ranch life. It was a distraction, a way to keep her mind occupied while her body continued to recover. Emma listened carefully, her curiosity growing despite the lingering fear. She asked questions about the horses, the cows, and even the simple mechanics of the water system. John answered patiently, impressed by her interest and resilience. By mid-morning, the sun was high and the air had grown warmer. John suggested that Emma rest again, and this time she agreed without hesitation. He helped her back to the cabin, arranging blankets and pillows to ensure she was comfortable. While she rested, John reflected on the situation. It was clear that her injuries were more serious than he had initially thought. Though they had stabilized her, she would need proper medical attention soon. He considered the nearest town and the possibility of a doctor, but the distance and the terrain made it complicated. He resolved to make a plan later in the day, prioritizing her immediate comfort first. When Emma awoke again, it was early afternoon. She seemed slightly stronger, though still weak, and John noticed that her expression carried a mix of determination and apprehension. He offered her water and a light snack. "We'll take things slowly," he said. "There's no need to rush." She nodded, her trust in him growing with each small act of care and consideration. As the afternoon wore on, John and Emma began to talk more. Her voice was quiet at first, hesitant, but gradually she started sharing small fragments of her story. She had been traveling when an accident had left her injured and alone. Though she did not go into full detail, the bits she shared painted a picture of resilience and courage. John listened without judgment, offering support with quiet words and attentive gestures. He understood that trust had to be earned, and he was patient. Together, they began to plan small steps for recovery. John suggested gentle movements to keep her muscles from stiffening, and he helped her with light exercises around the yard. Each movement was slow and deliberate, designed to strengthen her without causing pain. Emma followed his guidance carefully, determined to regain her strength and independence. The process was exhausting, but with John's support, she began to see small improvements. As the sun started to dip toward the horizon, John and Emma sat on the porch, watching the colors change in the sky. The day had been long and challenging, yet it had also brought progress. Emma's body was stronger than that morning, and her spirit seemed to lift slightly with each passing hour. John, too, felt a sense of fulfillment. The ranch, once a place of routine solitude, had become a place of purpose and connection. He realized that life could change in an instant, and that moments of vulnerability and need could lead to unexpected bonds. Evening approached, and John prepared a simple dinner. They ate together, and conversation flowed more naturally than it had that morning. Emma asked questions about life on the ranch, the animals, and even the small routines John followed each day. John responded with stories of his own, sharing memories from his past, the challenges of living alone, and the quiet satisfaction he found in caring for the land and animals. The sharing created a deeper connection between them, a sense of companionship born from trust and mutual respect. After dinner, John helped Emma settle into the guest room again. He checked her bandages and offered her water before leaving her to rest. As she drifted to sleep, he sat outside on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the night sky. The quiet plains, once lonely and empty, now felt alive with possibility. He knew the days ahead would bring challenges, but he also understood that progress, no matter how small, was significant. That night, as the ranch settled into silence, John reflected on the journey so far. Emma's arrival had disrupted his routine, introduced uncertainty, and demanded care he had not anticipated. Yet it had also brought a sense of purpose, of connection, and of shared humanity. In caring for her, he had discovered reserves of patience, compassion, and courage that he had not realized he possessed. Emma, for her part, slept fitfully but with a growing sense of safety. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to trust another person fully, to lean on someone for help without fear. The wounds she carried were not only physical but emotional, and the calm presence of John provided a space where healing could begin. As the night deepened, the ranch remained quiet, the wind gently brushing against the fields, and the animals resting in their stalls. Inside the cabin, two lives intertwined, each learning from the other in ways neither could have anticipated. The journey of recovery, trust, and understanding had only just begun, and the challenges ahead were many, but the foundation had been laid. Part 3 closed with a sense of cautious optimism. The afternoon and evening had shown that even after fear and struggle, progress was possible. Emma had begun to regain strength and hope, and John had embraced a new role of caretaker and companion. Together, they faced the uncertainty of the coming days, strengthened by trust, patience, and the quiet resilience that life in the wide open plains demanded. The story of their connection, forged in unexpected circumstances, was just beginning to unfold, promising both challenge and growth in equal measure. The morning light spilled gently over the ranch, painting the fields with golden hues. The quiet air was filled with the familiar sounds of animals stirring, cows lowing softly, horses neighing, and birds calling to one another from the trees. John had been awake for hours, checking the barn and making sure the animals had fresh water. But his mind was not only on the ranch today, it was also on Emma. He had watched her struggle over the past days, seen the mix of fear, pain, and determination in her eyes, and knew that she had come a long way. Yet he sensed that the hardest part of her journey was still ahead. When Emma awoke, she looked more alert than before, though her movements were still careful. Her injuries had started to heal, but she was exhausted from the effort of standing, walking, and trusting herself to move safely. John came into the room with a small smile and a cup of warm tea. "Good morning, Emma. How did you sleep?" he asked gently. She took a slow sip of tea and replied, "Better than yesterday, thank you." The simple words carried gratitude, relief, and a quiet sense of hope that made John's chest tighten slightly. Breakfast that morning was simple: eggs, toast, and fruit, but it carried a sense of ritual that Emma had come to rely on. John encouraged her to eat enough to build strength, and she followed his advice, knowing that her recovery depended on these small but essential acts. After breakfast, John suggested they take another walk outside. He could see the hesitation in Emma's eyes, but he also knew that movement and fresh air were important for both her body and her mind. Slowly, carefully, they walked across the yard. Each step was deliberate. John offered his arm for support and Emma took it, relying on him but also testing her own strength. As they moved, John spoke softly, telling her about the ranch, its routines, and the history of the land. He told her stories about the animals, about seasons changing, and about life in the wide, quiet plains. The conversation was not just a distraction. It was a way to rebuild normalcy, to remind Emma that there was a world beyond fear, pain, and uncertainty. By mid-morning, John noticed that Emma seemed more confident. Her steps were steadier, her posture more upright. They reached the edge of a small pond that reflected the sky like a mirror. The water was calm, and the sound of a gentle breeze rustling through nearby trees added to the serenity. Emma paused, looking at the water, taking in the beauty of the world around her. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a small smile. "It's beautiful here," she whispered. John nodded, understanding the significance of the moment. Beauty, calm, and safety, things she had not experienced recently, were slowly returning to her life. After returning to the cabin, John suggested they spend time on small tasks together. He showed Emma how to mend a broken fence, how to carry feed to the animals, and how to check the water troughs. At first, she moved slowly, careful not to strain herself, but with each task, she gained confidence. John watched her closely, correcting gently when needed and praising every small success. These small accomplishments, while seemingly ordinary, were monumental for Emma. Each step toward self-reliance strengthened her body, her mind, and her spirit. As the afternoon approached, a storm began to form in the distance. Dark clouds rolled across the plains, and the wind picked up, rustling the trees and causing the tall grass to sway. John quickly guided Emma back to the cabin, making sure she stayed safe. The storm brought with it a sense of urgency and tension, reminding them both that the world, even on a quiet ranch, could change suddenly. Inside, they secured the doors and windows, lit a fire in the hearth, and settled near it, watching the storm unfold. The hours passed slowly, with the sound of rain tapping against the roof and wind whistling through the trees. Emma, feeling more comfortable now, began to open up about her journey before arriving at the ranch. She spoke of challenges she had faced while traveling, of moments when she had felt alone and frightened, and of the determination that had kept her moving forward. John listened quietly, offering words of encouragement and empathy. He could see the strength in her, a resilience that had carried her through difficult times and would continue to guide her. As the storm raged outside, the cabin became a sanctuary. They shared small tasks, preparing a simple meal, checking the animals through the windows, and tidying the space to make it comfortable. These activities, mundane in appearance, were acts of partnership and trust. Emma learned to rely on John's guidance while also discovering her own capabilities. John, in turn, found purpose and fulfillment in helping her, in providing stability, and in witnessing her growth. Evening came, and the storm began to subside. The sky cleared gradually, revealing a brilliant sunset that bathed the plains in deep shades of red and gold. Emma, feeling stronger and more confident, stepped outside with John to watch. She inhaled the cool, fresh air, savoring the sense of safety and calm that surrounded her. "I feel stronger today," she admitted quietly. John smiled, understanding the importance of her words. Strength, both physical and emotional, was returning to her, and he had been privileged to witness it firsthand. Dinner was simple but nourishing, a quiet reflection of their day's progress. They ate together, speaking freely, laughing at small, light-hearted moments and sharing thoughts about the future. Emma realized that she could begin to plan ahead, even if cautiously, and John realized that his role as caretaker was becoming something deeper, a bond built on trust, patience, and mutual respect. The cabin, once quiet and ordinary, now carried warmth, life, and hope. After dinner, they spent time preparing for the night. John checked Emma's bandages and helped her settle into bed, ensuring she had everything she needed. She lay down, her body tired but her spirit lighter than it had been in days. "Thank you for today," she whispered, her voice carrying genuine gratitude. John nodded, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. "We're just getting started," he replied gently, "and you're doing very well." That night, as John watched over the ranch from the porch, he reflected on the progress Emma had made. She had faced fear, pain, and uncertainty, yet she had continued to move forward, step by step. The storm had tested both of them, forcing them to rely on each other and adapt to circumstances beyond their control. In the process, they had discovered resilience, courage, and the quiet strength of human connection. Emma, resting in the warmth of the cabin, allowed herself to dream for the first time in weeks. Dreams of safety, recovery, and a future free from the dangers she had faced began to take shape. She understood that the road ahead would not be easy, but with John's guidance and support, she felt capable of facing it. The trust between them had grown, transforming a fragile alliance into a partnership built on understanding, empathy, and mutual respect. As the night deepened, the ranch fell into a peaceful silence. The wind rustled the grass softly, and the animals rested quietly in their stalls. Inside the cabin, two lives continued to intersect in ways that neither had anticipated. Each day, each small act of care and courage, was building a foundation for recovery, trust, and personal growth. The fourth part of the story closed with a sense of quiet triumph. Emma had gained strength, confidence, and hope, while John had embraced the role of mentor, caretaker, and companion. The challenges of the storm and the lingering questions of her past had tested them, yet they had emerged stronger, bonded by shared experience and determination. The ranch, once a place of routine solitude, had become a refuge, a place of growth, and a symbol of resilience in a world that could be unpredictable and demanding. Through the storm and the long day that followed, both John and Emma had discovered that strength came not just from physical recovery, but from trust, courage, and the quiet, steadfast support of someone who truly cared. The story of their journey continued to unfold, each day bringing new lessons, challenges, and moments of connection that would shape their lives forever. The morning light on the ranch was crisp and clear, casting long shadows across the fields and highlighting the quiet beauty of the plains. Birds chirped cheerfully in the trees, and the animals stirred as if sensing a new day full of opportunity. John had risen early, as always, but this morning felt different. There was a sense of anticipation, a feeling that the past days of worry and struggle had brought them to a turning point. Emma, too, had woken early, her movements more confident than before, and she was beginning to feel a sense of independence returning after days of fragility. Breakfast was calm and steady. John prepared eggs, toast, and fresh fruit, and Emma ate with a newfound energy that made John quietly proud. She smiled occasionally, and even laughed softly at small comments he made, a sound that had been absent during the first days of her arrival. The change was subtle but powerful. It was a sign that she was healing not only physically but emotionally, and that trust and connection had taken root between them. After breakfast, John suggested a walk across the fields, but this time the pace was faster, the steps surer. Emma followed willingly, no longer hesitant or fearful, leaning lightly on John for support but relying more on her own strength. The sun warmed their faces, and the wide-open spaces seemed less intimidating now. Emma took in the familiar sights, the grazing cows, the stable horses, the distant hills, and she felt a sense of belonging she had not known before. For the first time since her journey began, she felt like she was somewhere safe, somewhere she could breathe freely without constant fear. John guided her to a small hill near the edge of the ranch, a place where they could see for miles across the plains. The wind played softly through the grass and the distant mountains shimmered in the morning light. Emma stood quietly, absorbing the scene, letting the vastness of the world calm her racing thoughts. "It's peaceful here," she said softly. John nodded. "It is," he replied. "And it's a place where you can start again." The words were simple, but they carried hope, reassurance, and a promise of stability. As the day progressed, they worked together on small tasks around the ranch. John showed Emma how to repair fences more efficiently, how to carry feed without straining herself, and how to care for the animals with confidence. Emma approached each task with determination, learning quickly and gaining confidence with every success. She began to realize that she was capable of more than she had imagined, and that the isolation she had feared was slowly being replaced by empowerment and independence. By mid-afternoon, John suggested they take a short trip into the nearby town. Emma hesitated at first, uncertain about venturing beyond the ranch, but John reassured her that it was safe and that it would be a good step toward regaining normal life. Together, they loaded a small wagon with supplies and set off down the dirt road, the ranch slowly disappearing behind them. The journey was not just a practical trip, it was a symbolic step forward, a movement from recovery to reintegration, from fear to confidence. In town, Emma experienced a mixture of wonder and nervousness. The shops, the sounds of people, the smell of fresh bread and coffee. It was overwhelming after so many days of isolation. John guided her patiently, explaining each place and allowing her to absorb the surroundings at her own pace. She bought a few small necessities and even managed a friendly conversation with the shopkeeper, a small but significant step in her return to normal life. John observed quietly, proud of her courage and progress. Returning to the ranch in the late afternoon, the pair felt a sense of accomplishment. Emma had faced a new environment, navigated her fears, and emerged stronger and more self-assured. The experience reinforced the trust she had in John and deepened her sense of belonging on the ranch. John, too, felt a quiet satisfaction, recognizing that his guidance and support had helped her regain confidence, independence, and a sense of security. As evening approached, the sky painted itself with brilliant hues of pink, orange, and purple. The animals were settling down, and the wind had grown calm, carrying the soft fragrance of the fields. John and Emma sat together on the porch, sharing a quiet moment of reflection. "Thank you," Emma said softly, her voice filled with sincerity, "for everything." John smiled, placing a gentle hand on hers. "You've done all the hard work. I just helped you see it." The words were true, reflecting the partnership and mutual respect that had grown between them over the past days. Dinner was simple and warm, and they ate slowly, savoring both the food and the peaceful atmosphere. Conversation flowed easily, filled with stories, laughter, and plans for the coming days. They spoke about improvements to the ranch, small adventures, and ways to make life more comfortable and enjoyable. Emma's sense of hope had returned fully, and John felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that he had helped someone rebuild their life from a place of fear and uncertainty. After dinner, they spent time preparing for the night. John checked Emma's bandages one last time, ensuring everything was properly cared for, and Emma settled into her room with a sense of calm and security. The trust and connection they had built allowed both of them to rest without fear, and the peace of the ranch seemed to wrap around them like a protective blanket. That night, John sat outside under the stars, reflecting on the journey they had taken together. Emma had arrived wounded, frightened, and alone, yet through patience, care, and courage, she had begun to heal. The challenges of the past days, the injuries, the fear, the uncertainty, had forged a bond that was strong and resilient. John realized that life, even in isolation, could be deeply meaningful when shared with someone who needed care and guidance. Emma, lying in the quiet of her room, allowed herself to reflect on her own growth. She had faced fear, pain, and vulnerability, yet she had emerged stronger, more confident, and more hopeful. She understood that her journey was far from over, but she also knew that she was no longer alone. She had learned to trust, to rely on others, and to find strength within herself, lessons that would guide her for the rest of her life. The following days were marked by continued progress. Emma regained her full strength, walked longer distances, and became more involved in the daily tasks of the ranch. She began to explore the land with confidence, tending to animals, repairing fences, and even planting small sections of the garden. John guided her patiently, offering advice when needed but allowing her independence to grow. Their bond deepened further, rooted in trust, respect, and shared experience. Through each challenge and each small success, Emma realized that life could offer hope and renewal even after hardship. John, too, learned that compassion, patience, and guidance could transform both the giver and the receiver. Together, they had built a life that was not just about survival, but about growth, connection, and resilience. The story of Emma and John closed with a sense of fulfillment and hope. The ranch, once a quiet and solitary place, had become a sanctuary, a place of safety, recovery, and life renewed. Emma had found strength, independence, and a sense of belonging, while John had discovered the profound rewards of caring for another person, of offering guidance, and of witnessing transformation. As the sun set on the plains, painting the sky with vibrant colors, both stood together on the porch, watching the world around them. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had brought growth, trust, and the understanding that even in the quietest, most remote places, human connection could heal, transform, and inspire. The ranch, the land, and the lives of these two people were forever changed, and the future, filled with possibility, stretched out before them like the endless plains themselves. In the end, what had begun as a moment of fear and uncertainty had transformed into a story of courage, care, and hope. Emma had found safety and strength, and John had found purpose and companionship. Together, they faced the future with confidence, resilience, and a bond that would remain unbroken, no matter what challenges lay ahead.